Welcome to Spiritual Calisthenics. Christ is in our midst. On September 20th, we celebrate St. Eustathius the Great Martyr, wife Theopiste, as well as his two children, Agapius and Theopiste. Our righteous father, Eustathius, Archbishop of Thessalonica, St. John the Foreigner, St. Hilarion, the new martyr of Crete, and the after feast of the Holy Cross. Regarding the life passion of the holy great martyr Eustathius, known as Eustace Placidus, and of his wife. During the reign of the Emperor Trajan, there lived in Rome a general named Placidus, who was of noble birth, renowned, and possessed of great wealth. So valiant was he in battle, that his very name was feared by every foe. At the time when the Roman Emperor Titus conquered the land of Judea, Placidus distinguished himself as the most eminent of the Roman officers, and he displayed much bravery in combat. Even though by faith Placidus was an idolater, he showed himself to be a Christian in his manner of life. He fed the hungry, clothed the naked, helped those who had fallen into misfortune, and freed many who were fettered and imprisoned. He rejoiced more when he had occasion to do good to someone or to extend a helping hand to someone in distress than when he triumphed over his adversary. He was like another Cornelius, of whom mention is made in the Acts of the Apostles. He was lacking only in the holy faith, which is in our Lord Jesus Christ, without which every good work is dead. His virtuous wife, who had borne him 2 sons, was like him in all things. Placidus and his wife were kind and merciful to all, and they only lacked the knowledge of the one true God, whom they honored unknowingly by their good deeds. God, however, who loves mankind and desires that all be saved, and who looks upon those who do good, did not disregard this virtuous man and did not allow him to perish in the darkness of the deception of idolatry. Inasmuch as in every nation he that fears him and works righteousness is accepted with him, the Lord was pleased to accept Placidus and to reveal to him the path of salvation. Occurred in the following manner. One day, as Placidus was hunting together with his servants, as was his custom, he came upon a herd of deer. Having pointed them out to the horsemen accompanying him, he set out in pursuit. Picking out the largest deer in the group, he chased after it, and the deer became separated from the herd. The servants followed Placidus, but their horses became exhausted. They were left behind. Placidus, whose horse was the fastest, pursued the deer alone far into the wilderness. After he chased the deer for a long time, it climbed atop a great rock and stood there. Placidus drew near and looked at it, considering how he might take the deer. But the compassionate God, who in various ways affects a man's salvation and by means which he alone knows sets him upon the true path, ensnared the hunter. He manifested himself not through the agency of another as he did to Cornelius through Peter, but directly as he did to Paul. Placidus remained for a long time gazing at the deer, and Christ the Lord appeared to him in a vision. A most radiant cross appeared between the deer's antlers, and as Placidus gazed upon it, he beheld the likeness of Jesus Christ, who was crucified for us. He was astonished by this strange vision. He heard a voice saying to him, "Why do you pursue me, O Placidus?" As soon as he heard this divine voice, Placidus was stricken with fear, and he fell from his steed to the ground and lay as though dead. When he came to himself somewhat, he said, "Where art thou, O Lord? Thou speakest to me." The Lord said to him, "I am Jesus Christ, who being God clothed myself in flesh for the salvation of man, underwent suffering willingly, and bore crucifixion. Even though you do not know me, you honor me by your good works, and your many alms are like a fragrant sacrifice coming up before me, and I wish to save you. Therefore, I have appeared to you from above this beast, that I might bring you to know me and unite you to my faithful servants. I do not desire that a man who works deeds of righteousness perish in the snares of the foe." Placidus arose from the ground, but he saw no one. He cried out, "Now, O Lord, do I believe that thou art the God of heaven and earth, and the maker of all creation. Thee alone do I worship, and henceforth I desire to know no God other than thee. Wherefore I pray thee, O Lord, show me what I am to do." And again he heard a voice saying, "Go to a Christian priest and be baptized, and he shall indicate you the path to salvation." When Placidus heard these things, he was filled with joy and compunction. He fell to the ground in tears and worshipped the Lord who had appeared to him. He was sorrowful that until now he had not perceived the truth and had not known the true God. But he rejoiced in spirit that he had been deemed worthy by grace and had been brought to the knowledge of the truth, set upon the path of righteousness. Mounting his steed, he returned to his company, his spirit joyful, but he told no one what had occurred. When Placidus returned from the chase, he took his wife aside and related to her all that he had seen and heard. He said, "Last night I heard someone saying to me, 'In the morning your husband and your sons will come to know me, Jesus Christ, the true God. Bestow salvation upon those who love me. Therefore, let us not wait, but rather hasten to do which we have been commanded." That night, Placidus ordered that the house be found where the Christian priests lived. Having learned where this house was, Placidus took his wife and children and several of his devoted servants and went to the priest, whose name was John. He related in detail everything concerning how the Lord had appeared to him, and he asked to be baptized. When the priest heard these things, he glorified God, who calls from among the nations those who are pleasing to him. He instructed them in the holy faith and told them of all of God's commandments. When he had taught them sufficiently and prayed, he baptized them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Placidus was given the name Eustathius in holy baptism, and his wife, Theobiste. Eustathius means justice, Theobiste means godly faith, and their son's the name of Agapius, selfless love, and Theobistis, the same name as the mother. The priests communed them, the divine mysteries, and dismissed them in peace, saying to them, "May God be with you, and may enlighten you with divine knowledge. He has summoned you to the inheritance of life eternal. Therefore, when you are deemed worthy to behold him, remember me, your spiritual father." Thus, having been born again in the font of baptism, and filled with unutterable joy, they departed to their home. The grace of God illumined their souls and filled their hearts with such sweetness that it seemed to them they were not on earth, but in heaven. The next morning, Eustathius mounted his horse, and having taken a few of his servants, he made as though he were setting out on a hunt. He went to the place where he had seen the Lord, that he might render thanks there to him for his inexpressible benefactions. When he arrived at that place, he sent forth his servants, saying, "Go in search of game." He then dismounted, fell upon his face on the ground, and prayed, weeping and thanking God for his unutterable mercy, and that he chose to enlighten him and his family with the light of faith. He committed himself to the Lord and cast himself upon his good and perfect will, trusting that according to God's goodness, in a way known to him and pleasing to him, he would dispose of all things in a profitable manner. There it was revealed to him what misfortunes and sorrows should befall him. For he heard the Lord say unto him, "Eustathius, it behooves you to make manifest your faith and undoubting hope, and the fervor of your love for me. These things are proven not in circumstances of fleeting wealth and vain prosperity, but in poverty, tribulation. Therefore many sorrows shall befall you, and you shall be tested by misfortunes like another Job, that, having been tried like gold in a crucible, you might prove worthy of me, and receive a crown from my hand." Eustathius said, "O Lord, I stand before thee. Do thou with me as thou willest. I am prepared to accept all things thankfully from thy hand, for good and gracious art thou. As a father thou dost temper and punishment with mercy. Wherefore shall I not accept chastisement at thy merciful and fatherly hands? Yea, as a bondsman I am ready to bear and to suffer all that is laid upon me, only let thine almighty help be with me." Then he heard the voice say again, "Do you wish to undergo suffering now, or in the final days of your life?" Eustathius replied, "Lord, if it be not possible that temptation should pass me by, then let me bear these misfortunes now. Only send thine aid, that evil might not overcome me and separate me from thy love." The Lord said, "Take courage, Eustathius. My grace shall be with you and shall preserve you. When you are plunged into the abyss of humiliation, I will raise you up, and will glorify you before my angels in heaven. Likewise will I exalt you before men, and after you have borne many sorrows, I will comfort you once more, and return to you your former rank. However, do not rejoice in fleeting honors, only that your name is written in the book of life." Thus did St. Eustathius invisibly converse with God, receiving of him this divine revelation. Having been filled with spiritual joy and the grace of God, he returned to his home aflame with divine love. He did not hide these things from his honorable wife, but told her all that God had disclosed in the revelation, how many misfortunes and sorrows would befall them, which they must needs bear manfully for the Lord's sake, and how, if they would suffer all these things patiently, the Lord would grant them eternal joy and rejoicing. When his noble wife heard these things, she said, "May the Lord's will guide us. Only let us fervently pray that in his compassion he grant us patience." So they began to live honorably in piety, patiently abiding in fasting and prayer, giving alms more abundantly than before to the poor, and exercising themselves in every virtue more zealously than they had in their previous life of excellence. After a few days, by God's allowance, sickness and death came to Eustathius' home, and all his household, men and beasts alike, stricken with illness. But in a short time, almost all of his servants, men and women, and even his animals died. Thieves stole his possessions by night, for even though a few of the servants remained alive, they were confined to their beds by sickness, and there was no one to keep watch over the master's valuables. In a short time, the wealthy officer was impoverished. But he was not troubled, nor was he sorrowful. Eustathius did not fall into sin of despair, as all these things came to pass. But he gave thanks to God like another Job, saying, "The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. The Lord hath willed, so let it be. Blessed be the name of the Lord unto the ages." Eustathius comforted his wife, so that she would not be saddened by what had occurred, and she in turn consoled him. Thus they both bore these things patiently, trusting in the will of their Lord, and being consoled by hope in God's mercy. Being himself reduced to poverty, Eustathius determined to hide himself in a far-off country from all his acquaintances, to conceal his high rank and nobility amid commoners, living humbly and in poverty, so that far from every hindrance and all tumult, he might labor for Christ our Lord, who impoverished and humbled himself for the sake of our salvation. He took counsel with his wife, and they resolved to depart by night, leaving behind their few remaining servants, all of whom were ill. They took their 2 sons, removing their costly apparel, they clothed themselves in rags. Having taken what small portion of their possessions they could carry, they left their home at night, forsaking all for God's sake, glory, honor, and wealth. For even though Eustathius had suffered the loss of these things, he could easily have acquired them again, for he was a great noble and a man of high rank, beloved of the emperor, and respected by all. But he counted all the passing things of this world as dung, in order that he might have God alone as his helper. He wandered through distant and unfamiliar lands, concealing his identity, dwelling among the lowliest of peasants. Thus, having abandoned the beautiful chambers of his home, this emulator of Christ wandered about, having no place to lay his head. Soon it became known to the emperor and to all the nobles that their beloved General Placidus had disappeared. They wondered what had become of him. Had he been murdered by some foe, or had he somehow perished? So they questioned themselves concerning him, and were greatly saddened. They searched for him, but they could not penetrate the mysteries of God, which were wrought in Eustathius. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counselor? At that time, as Eustathius dwelt in a hidden place, his wife said to him, "Shall we remain in this place for a long time, my lord? Let us go away into a country even further away, so that we will not be recognized by anyone, and become a reproach to them that know us." And so they departed, together with their children, and took the road leading to Egypt. When they traveled for a few days, they came to the sea and found a boat there, which was about to set sail for Egypt. They boarded it and departed. The master of the ship was a most violent barbarian. Seeing that Eustathius' wife was exceedingly fair, he was wounded with lust for her, and he pondered evil in his heart, thinking that he would take her from her husband. When they arrived at the point along the coast where Eustathius was to disembark and continue along his way, the ship's captain demanded Eustathius' wife in place of the fair. Eustathius refused. He would not agree to surrender her. He was unable to thwart the captain, however, but that violent and inhuman barbarian drew his sword and attempted to kill Eustathius and cast him into the sea. There was no one to help Eustathius, who fell at the feet of that wicked man, weeping and beseeching him that he not separate him from his beloved wife, but without success. Finally the captain said, "Either depart from here in silence if you wish to live, or you shall straightway perish by this sword, and the sea will be your tomb." And Eustathius, together with his 2 sons, departed from the ship lamenting. The captain cast the boat off from the shore and set sail. How grievous was the separation of that God-pleasing man from his chaste and honorable wife! They gazed upon each other as they were parted. Eustathius and his children wept as they stood upon the shore, and his wife wailed in the ship as it sailed away, separating her from her husband, taking her to a land she knew not. Who can describe their sorrow? weeping and lamentation. Eustathius stood upon the shore, gazing at the boat until it could no longer be seen. Then he departed, weeping, leading along his young sons. The husband wept for his wife, and the children wept for their mother. That blessed soul could only comfort herself by reflecting on how this misfortune had visited them at the hand of the Lord, contrary to whose will nothing can come to pass. Now she had been called to the holy faith, that by patience she might attain the heavenly homeland. But Eustathius' misfortunes had not yet come to an end, for sorrows were to befall him, yet greater than those which had already come to pass. He had not yet recovered from the tribulations which had occurred when other trials beset him. Short time after he was parted from his wife, he was also to be deprived of his children. Across the path they were traveling, there lay a deep and swiftly flowing river, over which there was no bridge. Since Eustathius had to cross the river, and it was not possible for him to carry both of his children at the same time to the other shore, he left one child on the bank, put the other upon his shoulder, taking him across the river. When he reached the far shore, he set him down, and was returning to bring the other child across the river. When he was in the middle of the river, one of the children cried out. When Eustathius looked up, he saw a lion approach, snatch the child, and then run off into the wilderness. Eustathius stood there, looking on and lamenting pitifully, until the lion had run so far with the child, he had seized that he could no longer be seen. Then he turned around and started toward the other child. However, even before he had ceased weeping for one son, he was compelled to lament for the other. As he was returning towards the other child, a wolf suddenly appeared, which seized that child and carried him off into the woods. Overtaken from every side by misfortunes, Eustathius stood in the river, drowning, as it were, in the sea of his tears. Who can tell of his hard suffering, or of his lamentations and much weeping? He was deprived of his holy and chaste wife, who shared his faith and comforted him in his woes, and he was deprived of his children, from whom he derived consolation in his sorrows. Truly it was a wonder that he remained alive, and did not slip beneath the waters, bent as he was by his tribulations. Undoubtedly, the strong right hand of the Most High strengthened him in patience. Only he who permitted such temptations to come upon him bestows such fortitude. Emerging from the river, Eustathius remained on the bank weeping for a long time, and then he went on his way, sorrowing, having as his only consolation God, in whom he believed, for whose sake he bore all these things. He did not murmur against God, nor did he say, "Hast thou called me to know thee, O Lord, that I might be deprived of my wife and children? Of what profit to me is faith, if I am become the most wretched of all men? Is thy love for thy faithful such that they must perish, sundered from another?" No, that righteous and patient man said nothing of the sort. He only bowed his head, and in humility fell down before God, thanking him for these visitations, and thanking him that it pleased him that his servants should not enjoy worldly prosperity and vain diversions. Eustathius thanked him too, that they should abide in sorrows and misfortunes in order that he might console them with eternal joy in the age to come. God, who works all things to our benefit, and who allows tribulations to befall the righteous man, does not seek to inflict punishment through this means. Rather, tries one's faith and courage. His desire is not that a man should suffer, but that he should display good courage, that he give thanks to God for every circumstance. As the Lord once kept Jonah unharmed in the belly of the whale, so did he preserve whole both of Eustathius' children who had been snatched away in the mouths of beasts. When the lion crossed over the river upstream, carrying unharmed the child it had taken into the wilderness, shepherds caught sight of it, crying out, began to chase after it. The lion dropped the child uninjured and fled. Likewise the wolf, which was carrying the other child, who was still alive, was seen by farmers who chased after it shouting, and so it left the child to them unharmed. The shepherds and the farmers, who were from the same village, took the children and cared for them. Eustathius knew nothing of their deliverance, and continued along his way, now in patience giving thanks to God, now overcome by nature, weeping and saying, "Woe is me, who once basked in glory, but now am abased. Woe is me, who was once the master of a great household, but now am homeless. Once I was as a tree having many friends, when in the streets, by my servants in battle, by my soldiers, but now I am left alone in the wilderness. But forsake me not, O Lord, do not disdain me. Thou who beholds all things, forget me not, O all good one. O Lord, forsake me not until the end. I remember, O Lord, the words which thou spakest at the place where thou didst appear to me, saying, Like Job shalt thou undergo misfortunes. Lo, I have been subjected to more than Job. For although he was deprived of his possessions and honors, he nevertheless sat upon his own dunghill. I find myself in a strange land, and I know not where to turn. He had friends to comfort him, but my consolation, my beloved children, have been seized by wild beasts to be consumed in the wilderness. Although Job was deprived of his children, he could obtain from his wife some comfort and care. My good companion hath fallen unto the iniquitous hands of a barbarian, and I, like a reed in the wilderness, am shaken by the storms of my bitter woes. But be not angered with thy servant, who voiceth the sorrow of his heart, O Lord. As a man do I speak. In thee I am established. O thou who carest for me and dost guide me, in thee do I hope, and by thy love, as thou by a cool dew and a breath of wind, do I quench the fires of my sorrow. By the sweetness of my desires for thee, the bitterness of my misfortunes is made sweet. Thus spoke Eustathius, sighing and weeping. He arrived at a certain village named Odessos, where he settled and began to labor, hiring himself out to those that lived there, that by the works of his own hands he might feed himself. He toiled at such tasks as were unfamiliar to him, and labored at chores which he had never undertaken before. Later he requested the villagers to permit him to guard their granary, for which they paid him a very small sum. Though he lived in that village for 15 years in great poverty and humility, laboring much and eating his bread by the sweat of his brow, who can tell of his virtues and struggles? They may be imagined, could one consider how, while homeless and living in poverty, he exercised himself in nothing but prayer, fasting, weeping, and vigils, sighings of the heart, lifting up his eyes, hands, and heart unto God, and awaiting mercy from his compassion. His children were being raised nearby in another village, but he knew nothing of them. Neither did the children know anything of one another, even though they lived in the same village. His wife, like another Sarah, was preserved by God from the lust of the barbarian. For in the hour when he took her from her righteous husband, he was stricken with illness, whereupon he returned to his own land and died, leaving his captive untouched, undefiled. Thus did God preserve his faithful handmaiden, that finding himself among snares, she was not entrapped. Like a bird was delivered from the nets of the hunters. There was broken, he was delivered with help of the Most High. After the barbarian's death, that honorable woman was free, and lived untroubled and in peace, obtaining her food by labor in her own hands. At that time, foreign tribes made war against Rome, and wrought much havoc, overrunning a number of cities and provinces. The Emperor Trajan was greatly saddened, and he remembered his valiant general Placidus, and said, If Placidus were with us, our enemies would not mock us, for he was frightful to our foes. Our adversaries feared his very name, since he was courageous and fortunate in battle. The emperor and all his nobles still wondered as to how Placidus, together with his wife and children, could have disappeared. They resolved to search throughout the empire for him. The emperor said to his suite, I will bestow great honor and numerous gifts upon the man who finds Placidus. And lo, 2 good soldiers, Antiochus and Acacius, who were once devoted friends of Placidus, and had lived in his palace, stepped forth and said, O Emperor, supreme in power, give the command that we make search for that man, without whom the empire will be lost. Even if we go to the ends of the earth to find him, we will do so with all haste. The emperor rejoiced at their eagerness, and he immediately dispatched them in search of Placidus. They passed through many lands, cities, and towns, searching for the beloved general, and they asked all who they met whether they had seen such a man anywhere. Finally, they drew near to the village where Eustathius lived. At that time, Eustathius was in the field, watching over the granary. When he saw the soldiers approaching, he looked carefully at them and recognized them from afar as his friends. He rejoiced and wept out of joy, and he cried out to God, sighing in the depths of his heart. He went and stood alongside the road on which the soldiers were to pass. When they drew near to Eustathius, they greeted him in the usual manner, and asked him the name of the village, and who was lord over it. Likewise they inquired whether there was a certain man living there, who was a stranger, whose height was such, and his countenance of this sort, whose name was Placidus. Eustathius asked them, Why do you seek him?" They answered, "He is our friend, and for a long time we have not seen him. We do not know where he or his wife and 2 children are to be found. If someone would apprise us concerning him, we would give him much gold." Eustathius said, "I do not know him, neither have I heard of this Placidus. Nevertheless, my lords, I pray you, come to the village and rest in my hut. I see that you and your horses have been wearied by your journey. Therefore rest in my dwelling place, and later you may inquire concerning him whom you seek." The soldiers agreed and went with the saint into the village, but they did not recognize him. Eustathius, however, certainly knew them. Tears began to flow from his eyes. Nevertheless, he restrained himself so that they might not perceive who he was. Now there lived in that village a certain good man on whose property Eustathius lived. Eustathius took the soldiers to that man, and he asked him to offer them hospitality and to feed them. "I will recompense you by my labor for whatever you spend on them," he said, "for they are my friends." Out of the goodness of his heart, because he was moved by Eustathius' entreaties, and also since he had work to give the saint, he provided abundant hospitality for the strangers. Eustathius served them and brought in the food, and he placed it before them. He remembered how in his previous life those whom he now waited upon served him, and overcome by nature, he wished to weep, but he restrained himself so that he would not be discovered. He left the room, and having wept somewhat and then wiped away his tears, immediately returned and continued to serve like a slave, or the simplest peasant. The soldiers, who had looked frequently at him, gradually came to recognize him, and they said quietly to one another, "Man is like Placidus. Perhaps he is actually Placidus himself." They likewise said, "We remember that Placidus bore a deep scar upon his neck from a wound suffered in battle. If this man has such a scar, then he must be Placidus." When they beheld that scar, they immediately rose from the table and fell at his feet. They wept much out of joy and said, "You are Placidus whom we seek. You are the favorite of the emperor, concerning whom he has long been grieved. You are the commander of the Romans, on account of whose absence the whole army has not ceased to lament." Eustathius then perceived that the time had come, but as the Lord had promised him, his former rank and estate would be restored. He said, "Brethren, I am whom you seek. I am Placidus, together with whom you long campaigned. I am he who was once the glory of Rome, fearful to aliens and beloved of you. Now I am poor, however, useless and utterly obscure." Eustathius and the soldiers greatly rejoiced and wept for joy. They clothed him in the costly vesture of a general, and gave him the emperor's letter. They earnestly entreated him to come without delay to the emperor, saying, "Lo, our enemies have lifted up their horn, for there is no one of valor like you, who might overcome and scatter our adversaries." Hearing these things, the master of that household and all the domestics were amazed and perplexed, and it was noised throughout the village that the presence of a great man had been revealed in that house. And all went forth as if to behold a mighty wonder, and they marveled, seeing Eustathius arrayed as a general, and receiving honor from the soldiers. Antiochus and Icasius told the people of Eustathius' deeds and bravery and of his glory and noble birth. Hearing that Eustathius was a Roman general, the people were astonished and said, "How is it that this great man labored for us as a hired servant?" And falling down before him, they did reverence to him, saying, "Why, O master, did you not tell us of your great estate and rank?" Likewise, Eustathius' lord, with whom he had dwelt, fell down before him and entreated him that he be not angry with him for not having held him in high esteem. All the men of that village were put to shame, inasmuch as they had employed such a man as a hired servant. Soldiers seated Eustathius upon a horse. With all the people of the village escorting them off in great honor, they set forth to return to Rome. Along the way, Eustathius conversed with the soldiers. They made inquiry concerning his wife and children. He related to them everything as it had occurred, and they wept upon hearing of his ill fortune. Likewise, they told him how the emperor had been cast into grief on his account. Not only the emperor, they said, but the entire court and the army were saddened by your disappearance. Conversing thus, within a few days they arrived at Rome. The soldiers informed the emperor that they had found Placidus, and they told Trajan of the circumstances in which they had discovered him. The emperor, together with all his nobles, received him with honor and joyfully kissed him, asking him how it was that he had left his home. Eustathius related all that had come to pass, and the things concerning his wife and children. and all who heard were moved to pity. Then the emperor restored Eustathius to his former rank, and bestowed upon him wealth greater than that which he had previously enjoyed. All Rome rejoiced as Eustathius returned. The emperor entreated him to take up arms against the barbarians, to defend Rome by his valor against their attacks, and to punish them for having subdued a number of cities. Eustathius collected all his forces and saw that they were insufficient for a campaign such as that which was compelled to undertake. So he asked the emperor to send forth a decree throughout his dominions, ordering that suitable youths be impressed in every city and town, and that they be dispatched to Rome for military training. So it came to pass, the emperor issued an ordinance, and a multitude of young and strong men, fit to be soldiers, were brought to Rome. Among them were Eustathius' two sons, Agapius and Theobistus, who had already reached manhood, who were fair of countenance, as well as of great stature and strength. When these young men were brought to Rome, the general beheld them and loved them greatly, for nature itself draws a father to his children. Therefore he was overcome by love for them. Eustathius did not know that they were his children, however, even though he loved them as sons. He kept them always in his presence, shared his table with them. They were pleasing in his sight. Thereafter Eustathius went forth to do battle. Having engaged the barbarians by the power of Christ, he emerged victorious. Not only did he liberate the cities and lands overrun by them, he conquered the entire country of the barbarians and utterly overwhelmed their forces. Strengthened by his Lord, he displayed much valor and won a victory greater than any of his previous triumphs. When the war was concluded, and Eustathius was returning home in peace, he chanced upon a certain village, which was situated on a beautiful spot by a river. It was a pleasant place, conducive to repose. Therefore Eustathius rested there with his troops for 3 days, for it was pleasing to God that his faithful servant be reunited with his wife and children, and that the flock which had been scattered be gathered together. It was in that village that his wife lived. She had a garden from which she obtained her food with much labor. By God's providence, Agapius and Theobistus, knowing nothing of their mother, pitched their tent alongside her garden. For inasmuch as they hailed from the same village, they determined to share the same tent and to stay together. They loved one another as brothers, even though they did not know that they were brothers. And although they did not suspect the fraternal bond between them, they shared a fraternal love for each other. Therefore, they took their rest together by the garden of the one who had borne them, not far from the commander's camp. At noontime one day, while Eustathius was encamped with his troops in that village, the mother of Agapius and Theobistus was working in her garden. She heard the two young men talking as they rested nearby in their tent. They were asking each other about their origin. The elder of the two said, "I remember that my father was a general in Rome, but I do not know why he left Rome with my mother, taking me and my younger brother, for there were 2 of us. We went to the sea and boarded a ship. We then set sail, and when we reached our destination, my father left the ship with me and my brother, but my mother remained on the ship, though I do not know why. I remember only that my father wept much over her, and we wept also and continued to lament as we went along our way. When we came to a river, my father left me on the bank, my younger brother on his shoulder, took him to the other side of the river. After he had carried him to the opposite bank, and as he was returning for me, a lion came and snatched me up, took me into the wilderness. However, shepherds rescued me from him, and thus I came to be reared in the village that you know." Then the younger brother arose quickly and embraced him joyfully, and weeping, and he said, "Truly you are my brother, for I remember all that you have recalled. I saw with my own eyes how the lion seized you. At the same time, a wolf snatched me away, but farmers delivered me from him." So the brothers recognized one another, and they rejoiced exceedingly, embracing and kissing one another, and weeping copiously out of joy. Their mother, hearing their conversation, marveled and lifted up her eyes to God. Sighing and shedding tears, she was convinced that they were truly her children, and her heart, after so many bitter woes, was refreshed. Nevertheless, being a prudent woman, she did not venture without indubitable proof to reveal her identity to them, for she was impoverished, clad in a vile raiment, while they were eminent and distinguished soldiers. She decided to go to the general, to ask him to be allowed to return to Rome with his troops, that there she might more conveniently disclose who she was to her sons, and might also learn of her husband, whether he was alive or not. She went to the general, was brought into his presence, and bowing down before him, she said, "I entreat you, sir, permit me to accompany your forces into Rome, For I am a Roman, was taken captive by barbarians in this land 16 years ago. Now I am free, but I wander about a strange country, and I suffer from great want." The compassionate Eustathius immediately granted her request, commanded that she be allowed to return untroubled to her native land. As she stood before the general and gazed upon him, she clearly perceived that he was her husband. In astonishment, she remained standing there, as though in a stupor, but Eustathius did not recognize his wife. Thus she was granted joy upon joy, even as once she had known sorrow upon sorrow. Within she cried out unto God with sighing. She feared to tell her husband that she was his wife. She saw that he was most majestic and of dread countenance, and that he was surrounded by a multitude of attendants, while she was reduced to a state of extreme poverty. She departed from his presence, prayed to God her master, that he would himself cause her to be recognized by her husband and children. At a convenient time she returned to the general, and was ushered into his presence. He looked upon her and said, "What else do you require of me, aged woman?" She prostrated herself to the ground before him and said, "I entreat you, my lord, be not angry with me, your handmaid. I wish to inquire of your lordship about a certain matter. Only be patient, my lord, and hear out your handmaid." He said, "Very well, speak." And so she began saying, "Are you not Placidus, who in holy baptism was named Eustathius? Did you not see Christ on the cross between the deer's antlers? Did you not depart from Rome with your wife and 2 children, Agapes and Theopestus? For God's sake, was your wife not taken from you by a barbarian while you were on a ship? Christ the Lord himself, for whose sake I have suffered many tribulations, is my sure witness in heaven that I am truly your wife, that I have been preserved by his grace from defilement. That barbarian perished in the same hour in which he took me from you, punished by the wrath of God. Therefore, I remained unsullied until now, wander about in want." When Eustathius heard her, it was as though he had been awakened from sleep. He straightway recognized his wife, arose and embraced her, and out of joy they shed abundant tears. Then Eustathius said, "Praise and gratitude do we render unto Christ our Savior, who in his mercy has not forsaken us, but even as he promised that he would grant us consolation after we had undergone tribulations, so he has caused it to be." And thus they rejoiced and wept much, giving thanks unto God. When Eustathius had ceased weeping, his wife asked him, "And where are our children?" He sighed from the depth of his heart and said, "They were eaten by beasts." His wife replied, "Be no longer sorrowful, my lord. For as God has unexpectedly granted us to encounter one another, so will he enable us to find our children." Eustathius said, "Did I not tell you? They were consumed by beasts." The obesity then began to relate to him all that she had heard the day before as she labored in her garden, what she had heard said by the 2 soldiers as they conversed with each other, and how she had perceived that they were her sons. Eustathius immediately summoned them and asked them, "Who were your parents? Where were you born? Where were you reared?" Then the elder brother began to tell him of their childhood, saying, "We, sir, were very young when we were separated from our parents, and we remember very little. We do recall, however, that our father was a Roman general, like your lordship, but we do not know what happened to him. We left Rome together by night, but when we took ship across the sea, our mother remained on the ship, although we do not know why. Weeping for her, our father came with us to a certain river, across which he decided to carry us one at a time. When he was in the midst of the river, beasts snatched us up. A lion took me, a wolf seized my brother. However, we were both delivered from being eaten by those beasts, I by shepherds, my brother by farmers, who took us and reared us." When Eustathius and his wife heard these things, they realized that these were their children. They embraced them and wept for a long time. And there was great joy in the soldiers' camp, even as once there had been in Egypt when Joseph was made known to his brethren. Every cohort learned that its general had found his wife and sons. All joined together in rejoicing, and there was a celebration exceeding that which had ensued following the troops' great victory. Thus did God grant consolation to his faithful servants, for he put to death and makes alive, makes poor and makes rich, casts down into sorrows and lifts up to joy and jubilation. Then could Eustathius have said with David, Come and hear, and I will declare unto you all that fear God, what things he has done for my soul. I will remember thee, O thou, who hast shown mercy unto me. The right hand of the Lord has wrought strength. The right hand of the Lord has exalted me. So Eustathius returned from battle, rejoicing both over his victory and because he had found his wife and sons. Before he arrived in Rome, the Emperor Trajan died. He was succeeded by Hadrian, who was exceedingly wicked and who hated the good and persecuted the pious. Eustathius entered the city in great pomp, as was the custom with Roman generals, bringing with him many captives and countless valuable spoils. He was received with honor by the emperor, by all Romans. They praised his valor, yet more than before, and he was held in still greater esteem than he had been previously. Nevertheless, God, who does not wish that his servants be honored and glorified overmuch in this perverted and inconstant world, was prepared eternal and immutable honor and glory for them in the heavens, and who had restored Eustathius to his former exalted state, transforming his sorrow into joy, ordained that martyrdom be his path to heaven. In but a short while he returned Eustathius to a state of dishonor and sorrow, which he gladly accepted for Christ's sake. The impious Hadrian wished to worship and to sacrifice to the demons in gratitude for the victory over his enemies. He went into the temple of the idols together with his nobles. Only Eustathius did not enter the temple, but remained without. The emperor asked him, Why do you not wish to enter the temple with us and to worship the gods? You should be the first to render thanksgiving to the gods, inasmuch as they not only preserved you whole and hale, and have granted you victory over enemies, but have restored your wife and sons to you. Eustathius answered, I am a Christian, and I know Jesus Christ alone to be my God. Him do I honor and thank, and I worship him, for he has granted me every blessing, health, victory, my wife, and my children. I will not worship the idols, which are deaf, dumb, powerless. So Eustathius returned to his own home. The emperor was enraged and considered how he might punish the saint for the disrespect he had shown towards his gods. First, he stripped Eustathius of his rank, and commanded that he be brought into the presence as a commoner. Likewise, he had Eustathius' wife and sons brought before him. He enjoined them to sacrifice to the idols, but since he was unable to separate them from Christ, he sent them to be eaten by beasts. Thus St. Eustathius, the glorious and valorous soldier, together with his family, was sentenced to be put to death in the arena. He was not ashamed to be subjected to dishonor. Neither did he fear death for the sake of Christ, whom he zealously served, but instead he finished his course eagerly, faithfully, and well, confessing Christ's holy name openly before all. He exhorted his honorable wife and beloved children not to fear death for the Lord, who grants life unto all. They likewise strengthened one another by their words and hope for rewards to come, so that they went forth to their death as though to a feast. The beasts were loosed upon them, but they did not harm them. For whenever one of the beasts began to approach them, it would immediately turn about and retreat with its head bowed. Thus the beasts were made calm. But the emperor became yet more enraged. He ordered that they be led out of the arena and cast into prison. In the morning, he commanded that a brass ox be heated, that St. Eustathius, his wife, and 2 sons be placed therein. That blazing ox was cooled with dew for the holy martyrs, as once the Chaldean furnace was cooled for the 3 youths. Therein the holy martyrs prayed, and they surrendered their sacred souls into the hands of God, being translated unto the heavenly kingdom. 3 days later, Hadrian returned to the ox, wishing to see the ashes of the martyrs, but when he opened its doors, he found the saints' bodies whole and unharmed. Not a hair of their heads had been burnt. They seemed rather to be alive, sleeping, radiant with a most wondrous and supernatural beauty. All the people cried out, Great is the God of the Christians! Thus the emperor returned in humiliation to his palace. All the people reviled him for his cruelty, for having needlessly put to death a general so indispensable to Rome. The bodies of the saints were then buried with fitting reverence. Thy martyrs, O Lord, in their courageous contest for thee, received as the prize the crowns of incorruption and life from thee, our immortal God. But since they possessed thy strength, they cast down the tyrants and wholly destroyed the demon's strengthless presumption. Christ God, by their prayers, save our souls, since thou art merciful. O blessed one, since thou didst emulate Christ's sufferings and didst drink his cup with eagerness, thou didst become a partaker and joint heir of his glory. O wise Eustathius, he is God of all things. He gave thee divine power from heaven's height. This story, while very long, is of course very beautiful. Of many of the saint stories that could be made into motion pictures, this story, of course, has it all. It has love, adventure. It has everything. And Saint Eustathius is truly a great saint. Speaks to the glory of family. Have a love between husband and wife. Have love for your children. Walk together to paradise as a family. Hey, Saint Eustathius, Saint Theophisti, Saint Agapius, Saint Theophisti, intercede for all of us that we might also achieve salvation. The readings are according to the feast of Saint Eustathius. From St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, Brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. This, of course, we see within the person of St. Eustathius, because although he was a general, his great battle was with himself and against the devil himself. For we are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, principalities being the angels and therefore demons that are ruling over, in this case, Hadrian, against the powers being the angels or demons that are able to bring miracles or great actions in the world, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places, so against demonkind itself. That is what we are doing war against. Therefore, take the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. Having done all, stand. Stand, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, having put on the bright breastplate of righteousness, having shod your feet with the equipment of the gospel of peace. Besides all these things, taking the shield of faith, which you can quench all the flaming darts of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Saint Eustathius and his entire family armed themselves in this way. They had the truth of God, enabling to allowing them to do the work that they needed to do. They were able to do the gospel of Christ wherever they went. They had the shield of faith, protecting them against all harm, against the enemy that tried to bring them down. They had the breastplate of righteousness, knowing that God would preserve them, even when things were at their worst. They had the helmet of salvation, which is the promise that kept them going, the sword of the Spirit that allowed them to go forward into battle, both in physical harm and in spiritual harm, and to arrive and be able to stand against the enemy. Gospel according to St. Luke. The Lord said to his disciples, beware of men who will lay their hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my sake. This will be a time for you to bear testimony. Settle it therefore in your minds not to meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up by parents, brothers, kinsmen, and friends. Some of you they will put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair on your head will perish. By your endurance, gain your life. So this last line, that not a hair of your head will perish, is made manifest in the lives of these great saints. For though they gave up their souls and entered as a family into paradise, not a hair on their head was damaged, showing that it was not by the power of Hadrian and his malice that these saints entered into the kingdom of heaven, by God welcoming his beloved saints in victory and in glory, greater than any glory that they could ever imagine or experience on earth. May we all enjoy such a reward. I hope that you've enjoyed today's spiritual calisthenics. Have a blessed and wonderful day.